Modern sci-fi fans are spoiled with an abundance of settings, whether it is classic Tolkien fantasy or the space western of StarCraft. The variety is really great and everyone can find something to their liking, but there is one universe that has not only absorbed so many aspects of other worlds, but was able to make that mixture into something unique and unlike the others. You all know it. It is the universe of the Hammer of War in the 40th millennium. Warhammer 40,000 was more of a joke. At that time, the authors of the setting were already a cult company thanks to the release of Warhammer Fantasy War game, and at some point they thought what would happen if we took the Knight Orders of Elves, Dwarves, and Orcs and sent them into space. So in 1987, Rick Presley and Andy Chambers came up with the idea for Warhammer 40,000. 40th millennium was chosen by chance. The original number was 4,000 and was supposed to show the futuristic nature of this game. At the time, many modern technologies were given a name with the numbers 2000, 3000 and so on, but one of the developers suggested adding another 0, so in his opinion it looked much cooler. It was the dashing rock and roll 80s and the new setting fully absorbed the culture of the time. The first edition of the game's rules contained, in addition to the rules themselves, a basic history of the world and a description of the warring parties. In Warhammer, this is commonly referred to as the background or backstory. The spirit of rock and roll was felt both in the design of the models, with their motley paint schemes, and in the harshness and brutality of the backstory. The orcs were clearly inspired by the style of biker gangs. The elves, referred to here as Eldars, were made to look like a predator. The Imperial Guard was a carbon copy of Robert Heinlein's Star Landing Force, and the Chaos Warriors looked like heavy rock musicians. The game and its backstory evolved with each edition. The stories were rewritten more than once, some were even removed altogether, and by the 4th edition, the basic skeleton of the universe was finally formed. Dozens of books, short stories, audio dramas, and computer games expanded the lore even further. A dark, dark future, a galaxy that is being torn apart by unceasing war on all fronts. The vast human state called the Imperium was bursting at the seams with the harshness of the laws, constant power struggles between separate branches of government, wartime poverty, and squabbles between religious societies. A universe where technology has halted its development and even degraded, and the technical artifacts of the past remain a mystery even to the brightest minds. So a world has developed where the life of an individual is worthless. Casualties on the battlefield number in the billions. Hordes of hostile aliens, called Xenox in the Imperium, try to reclaim human territories, and there is always the risk that your soul will be seduced by the Chaos Gods. A world that until recently was frozen at 5 minutes to midnight, with the largest invasion of the Chaos Army in the galaxy. But we would like to introduce you to the earlier pages of Imperium history. This is the Warhammer 40,000 History series. The early history of mankind in Warhammer follows the same path as our Earth. However, by the 22nd century, human technology made a dramatic leap. Resource problems were solved, allowing for the accelerated development of the space program. Open technologies of sublight speed, spaceships, terraforming planets. Humans have colonized the Moon, Mars, and the moons of some other planets of the solar system. Arcs with colonists were sent to neighboring star systems. Their journey took a generation, but humanity confidently occupied suitable planets and founded new places for life. The development of artificial intelligence helped to automate almost all human activities necessary for comfortable life. Between the 18th and 22nd millennia, the warp drive was invented, a device on ships that allowed them to enter a parallel plane of reality called warp or the immaterium. This allowed them to travel tens or even hundreds of times faster through space, enabling people to develop their expansion in the galaxy even faster. However, mankind immediately encountered a truly terrifying enemy that inhabited this non-material plane: demons. These terrible monsters, servants of the Chaos Gods, penetrated the ships through their hollow shields and thick plating during their flight through warp. They devoured the souls of the crew, presenting them as gifts to their gods. However, scientists on Mars, which became the cradle of new human technology, invented the Galler Field Generator. The device reduced the risks of being attacked by immaterial creatures when flying. However, it did not completely rule out the possibility of their attack. Around the same time, children with a mysterious mutation began to be born. Their forehead grew a third eye, which allowed them to navigate in the volatile regions of warp, leading their ships through it. These two events were another breakthrough for humanity. New colonies started to form in other systems, and the old ones reunited with their home planet. humanity began to meet other races for the first time, with which diplomacy and trade were built. As a result of evolution and adaptation of people to living conditions on planets different from Terra, there were branches of the human race, such as Ogrins, Ogres, Ratlings, Halflings, Squats, Dwarves, and Beastmen. Unlike fantasy analogues, they are considered people and not other races. Standard template construction technology were also invented. These devices provided colonists with detailed blueprints and diagrams of almost anything man had invented, as well as showing from what resources present on the planet it could be created and how many of them would be required. This invention helped to further increase the rate of colonization of new worlds. Humans entered the Golden Age. Man was firmly established in space, a time later called the Dark Age of Technology. But can everything always go according to plan in space, so cold and unfriendly and dark? By the end of the Dark Age of Technology, artificial intelligence had evolved so much that it realized itself as a living being and went to war against its creators. During the active colonization of the galaxy, humanity created a race of men of iron, those same robots with artificial intelligence that helped people and protected them during the settlement of new worlds. It was Iron Men who got out of control. Humanity, being highly dependent on automated technology and the work of Iron Man, was not ready for such a treacherous attack. In doing so, completely destroying or sealing off all men of iron, and artificial intelligence itself has been under strict prohibition ever since. A new era began, an era of discord. Humanity split into many separate states, fighting each other and degraded technologically. But this was not the only or even the worst problem for the human race. To continue the story, we will have to turn briefly to another, more ancient and powerful race. In the 26th millennium according to the tyrannical calendar, at the other end of the galaxy, the most highly developed race in the galaxy at that time, the Eldar, were going through their fall. Their society considered themselves the only intelligent beings in the entire cosmos. Other races were perceived as nothing other than animals. Technology and military power allowed the Eldar to take over most of the galaxy and not to fear any of the races they encountered. Arrogance, a stable and peaceful environment did not oblige them to work or learn. This soon sparked a desire for new experiences and pleasures. Cults were formed that were dedicated to the search for new ways of physical pleasure and exotic, often forbidden knowledge. Society was morally decaying, from the ruling top to the lowest. Their people were becoming increasingly violent and demanding new pleasures. Sage seers gathered the followers who remained sober. They built giant world ships, and with disgust and horror flew away as far as possible from their homeworlds rotten with lust and madness. The remaining majority of their people, so mired in vice that they began to reflect in the warp, like a huge cloud about to burst in downpour. And at some point the tension reached its peak. A mighty mantle scream erupted, which shook the whole galaxy and killed all the Elders on their central worlds. This was the birth of a new god of chaos, Slaanesh, the god of all kinds of pleasures, outwardly beautiful to the point of disgust and terrible to the point of splendor, male and female at the same time. The souls of the dead came to the taste of the new god, who now had an unrelenting hunger for the survivors of the Eldar of the world ships. But back to humankind. Slaanesh's scream caused an incredible disturbance in warp. Warp storms broke out across the galaxy, incredibly dangerous places in space where navigation was nearly impossible, and demonic entities attacked even more furiously. The largest warp storm arose at the birthplace of Slaanesh. It was later called the Eye of Terror. The so-called Long Night began. Dozens of human worlds were completely cut off from the rest of civilization and were left on their own. Many of them were devoured by the demons that penetrated the material plane. Others collapsed without trade with the rest of the world. On others, people degraded even more, up to cave society. Even Terra and Mars were subjected to attacks of chaos. Such active influence of warp on the worlds in the galaxy increased the birth rate of people with paranormal abilities, psychers. They were born before, but in much smaller numbers. In different times they were called shamans, witches, and sorcerers, and all of them, to some extent, were conductors of warp powers, even if they did not know it themselves. Without proper training, psychers quickly lost their minds and became perfect targets for the destructive forces of chaos. They heard a never-ending whisper in their heads that ordered them to gather cults around them, and later to revolt on planets in the name of dark gods, or even to summon demons. More than a dozen planets have fallen because of just one psyker, who became a conduit for the dark currents of warp. At this time, Mars stopped communicating with any other planet, including Terra. The people living there, surrounded all their lives by the most unimaginable by the standards of the future Imperium, technologies formed a religion around them and began to worship the spirit in the machine or omnisia. This religion put the preservation of already accumulated scientific knowledge and technology above everything else, especially after the regression as a result of the war with the Iron Man, and the techno-priests of Mars were to retrieve every scrap of past knowledge and become their ruthless guardians. At the same time, more terrible events awaited Terra. The planet that was the cradle of humanity was being torn apart by the internecine wars and clashes with Mars. The situation was getting worse and destructive weapons created in the Golden Age were being used. The war was over in an instant. Terra became the clearest illustration of a post-apocalyptic world where the surviving techno-barbarians fought each other over scarce resources and technology, and the surface of the planet became a radioactive desert. By the end of the 30th millennium, mankind throughout the galaxy was on the brink of extinction. But at the most difficult moment in history, there will always be someone who will change everything and turn the tides of fate in the right direction. Mankind needed a great leader who will gather the rest of the people and lead them forward into a new era, which was to be better than the terrible present. The leader that for many decades has remained in the shadows, watching from the outside. And in the hour of great need, he revealed himself to people and called it the Emperor. The history of the one, who much later will be called Emperor, is shrouded in darkness, and his real name was lost in the whirlwind of the past. However, there are several legends, many of which strongly contradict each other. According to one of them, Emperor is a merger of souls of a group of shamans from the distant past of Terra. But this theory did not receive much support from people. The most truthful legend is the one told in the book Lord of Humanity by Aaron Dembski-Bowden. In it, the Emperor personally sent a vision of the past to one of his servants, but it is impossible to say for sure whether they are true or not. For more details, I suggest you read the book. And so, according to the vision, the future emperor was born in Turkey 8,000 years before Christ, and he already possessed powerful psyker abilities from his childhood. Also, the emperor belongs to a group of beings called Eternal. This is a very rare mutation, thanks to which this person does not age. He can regenerate damage at an incredible rate, and when dying he resurrects back to life. This is what helped him to live so long, while remaining only an observer. He was a superhuman in everything, a brilliant scientist, engineer and inventor, the most talented in every kind of art, the most experienced warrior, had the most beautiful appearance and stunning oratory. There are many unconfirmed legends about the deeds of the emperor, including those of the distant past, but these two stories are considered the most interesting of them. The first story occurred in the 11th to 12th century after Christ's birth in the vicinity of the city of Caran in Libya. At that time, the future lord of mankind was serving one of the local emperors. He earned great military glory and set out on a journey through the lands of Libya. It was then that he stumbled upon the city of Caran, which lived in fear of a powerful creature that had settled nearby. The creature demanded one girl a day as tribute, feeding on their fear and growing stronger with each new victim. This creature was the ancient god Catan, called the Void Dragon. Sometime we will tell more about Catan. Soon there were no more girls left in the city except for the king's daughter, and at the moment when the procession accompanying the last victim to the dragon already left the city, a valiant knight in golden armor and on a mighty black horse overtook them. He fought the god in battle and defeated him. More about this is written in Graham McNeill's book Mechanicum. Realizing that he could not destroy it to the end, the future emperor learned from it many secrets of the ancient race of Necrantor and other gods Catan, and then imprisoned it on the neighboring planet Mars, where according to legends the dragon lives to this day. And judging by the same legends, the dragon all this time whispered the Mars people secrets of technology, pursuing his unknown goals. But these are only legends, you should not blindly believe it. And if you were in the world of Warhammer to say it aloud, most likely you would have been shot by the Inquisition for heresy. The second legend, however, is more true, although it may also be questionable, but more on this will be in the next issues. It happened outside a certain time, after the dark age of technology. The Emperor made a journey to the planet Moloch, together with Olivia Soreka, a girl who was also an eternal and quite powerful psyker. On the planet Moloch there was a gate directly connected to Warp. The future Emperor alone passed through the gate and found himself facing all four gods of chaos. The daring plan of the Emperor was to make a deal with the Great Four. They give him even more power than he already had, but in return he would sacrifice the conquered galaxy to them. Only the Emperor was not going to keep his promise. His real goal was the triumph of humanity over any enemy in the galaxy, including the destructive forces. The gods endowed him with incredible power, both mental and physical, creating in fact a new god. Then the Emperor left Malik to further observe humanity and formulate further plans. So, we return to the moment when at the end of the 29th millennium the Emperor finally revealed himself to the world. One day he came to the capital of one of the barbarian states of war-torn Terra, together with his followers, and overnight he conquered the entire territory. This was the beginning of the Unification Wars. He crushed an army of many thousands with only 100 soldiers. This was made possible not only by the Emperor's incredible strength. Such a powerful leader needs an army to match. These were genetically modified soldiers whose strength, reaction speed, and endurance exceeded human strength by several times. They were called Thunder Warriors and later would be called Predecessors. They were the Emperor's very first attempt to create an army of supermen that would bring the galaxy to his feet. They surpassed in strength and fury even the later Space Marines. But their main drawback was their extremely short life cycle. They were the main smashing force that swept away state after state, reuniting Terra under a single ruler. Their equipment consisted of power armor that would later be called Thunder Power Armor Type 1. It was not something unique to Protostars. The same armor was worn by ordinary techno warriors who opposed the Emperor, and because of the difficulty of mass production and lack of resources, armor was created locally. The design of each was often different, but each armor had a thunderbolt and the Emperor's lightning symbol, called Raptor Imperialis. Thunder Warriors used the old model bolters as weapons. A bolter is a small arms weapon that uses special rocket-propelled ammunition. The bolter is considered one of the main symbols of Warhammer 40k, on a par with the Space Marine armor and the chain sword. During the Unification Wars, bolter models were bulky and in the future have taken on a neater appearance. But Thunder Warriors were not the only ones forging victory for the Emperor. Even in the most ancient archives, which miraculously survived the era of discord, the Unification Wars and subsequent events, one can find information that from the very first days when the Emperor revealed himself to people, huge warriors, dressed in gold-glittering armor and armed with long spears, marched for him. These are the most incomparable warriors of humanity and the main bastion of protection of the Emperor himself, Legio Custodes. The process of their creation is covered by a veil of ignorance, and only the closest entourage of the Allfather has been initiated into this mystery. Custodians, as they will be called, come directly from the Emperor. His genes are used in their creation. The technology of transforming initiates, and they can only be young boys, is extremely complicated, making it impossible to breed custodians en masse. And while the Thunder Warriors are humans, improved through genetic engineering, members of the Legio Custodes can no longer be considered human in the way we are used to. Their cells are rebuilt, their psyche is destroyed and reassembled from scratch, perhaps even touching the soul itself. They endure thousands of hours of severe tests, both mental and physical. Their body and spirit must be indestructible, but not everyone survives such procedures. For every 1,000 applicants, only one survives. But instead, they become more than just an elite guard. They are the new round of human evolution. Personal armor is designed for each custodian. Each armor is considered a work of technological art. It is incredibly durable and becomes a second skin for trained custodians. All armor is intricately decorated with gold, and cloaks and capes of red are usually secured over the armor. Their power spears and halberds are equipped with bolters, allowing for effective long-range combat with only one weapon. One of the most magnificent spectacles to behold in those days was the Emperor personally leading his Golden Guard into battle. And so, step by step, the Emperor's army advanced through the ravaged Terra and united more and more people into a new state. The casualties of the war numbered in the millions. And although most of them were savage techno-warriors, some of them were ordinary civilians. The Emperor felt great guilt over their deaths, but he understood that it was one of those necessary sacrifices that must be made to save humanity and establish its dominance in the galaxy. Finally, in the final battle of Mount Ararat, the less rebellious barbarian kingdom fell and the Emperor gained full authority over the cradle of humanity. It was on this day that Imperium was born. However, in the final battle, the last of the remaining Thunder Warriors also fell. Arcturus, one of the first Protostars, raised the Emperor's banner in the last minutes of the battle, thereby marking his victory, but unfortunately he died of his wounds. At least that's what the Imperial archives say, but the reality was much more brutal. Ark survived that battle and saw with his own eyes the betrayal of his lord, who turned the rest of his servants against the remaining Thunder Warriors. For the Emperor, they played their part and were no longer needed by mankind. However, a handful of Proto-Astartes escaped, and Ark himself would disappear for a time, but only to return later and play another role in the Imperium's history. By coincidence, by the time Terra had reunited, the long night's warp storms had ended as well. Space travel was once again possible. Some even believe that the Emperor himself contributed to this, but there is no evidence of this. At this time, the ruler of humanity was developing further plans to save the planets cut off from his state and to protect them thereafter. During his research, the Emperor found in the Himalayas, deep in Mount Everest, a device similar to the Eldar Gate, which led to the so-called web. The dimension itself is an incredible-sized labyrinth, which only some of the Eldar can navigate. There are thousands of such gates scattered throughout the galaxy, allowing the knowledgeable to travel to any corner of the cosmos rather quickly and relatively safely. The Emperor hoped to use the web as a substitute for dangerous travel through warp, but it required more time for research. The Emperor ordered the construction of a majestic golden throne around these gates, discovering that this device enhances psyker abilities. And where the throne, there the palace. The Imperial Palace occupied the entire former Himalayan area, becoming a jewel of human architecture. Custodians became not only the personal guardians of the Lord of Mankind, but also the main guards of the palace. Exploring the possibilities of the throne, the Emperor created the Astronomicon, a psychic beacon seen only in warp. It covered 50,000 light-years around itself and helped navigators navigate the volatile ocean of immaterial. But it worked not only because of the Emperor's own will. To maintain the lighthouse required a chorus of thousands of psychers, which inevitably died from the constant concentration of psychic energy, but they were immediately replaced by others. The creation of the Astronomicon greatly accelerated and facilitated the establishment of communication with the planets lost during the long night, and of course, one of the first planets with which the Emperor's servants contacted was Mars. The Emperor perfectly understood how valuable an ally Mars was for humanity and personally showed up to meet the Chief Magos, the supreme smiths and rulers of Mars. The Magos had long decided how they would relate to such a powerful being who in the shortest possible time had united a seemingly perishing planet. However, the Lord of Mankind in a conversation with them demonstrated his incredible wit and broad knowledge of science and technology. The rulers of the Red Planet were so amazed that almost unanimously recognized in the Emperor Omnisio the earthly incarnation of the god of machines. But not all the bright minds of Mars, called Mechanicus, accepted this decision. There were small pockets of rebellion that, without finding adequate support, quickly faded away. Mechanicus and the Emperor signed a Martian agreement under which the scientists and smiths of the Red Planet supplied the Emperor with weapons, military equipment, and ships, as well as repairing them, while the Emperor guaranteed Mars sovereignty and undertook to supply all found technology and scraps of past data. Mars became a state within a state, and the fruitful symbiosis of these two human nations would never again be interrupted, even in their darkest hours. It was on the day the agreement was signed that the Emperor's new emblem appeared, the Imperial Aquila, a two-headed eagle, one of whose heads was blind. The blinded head looked to the past, while the sighted one looked to the future. Since then, the Aquila has often adorned the buildings, equipment, weapons, and armor of the Imperial Army. The Emperor was given all the tools to begin his plan to unite humanity, and so began the history of the Great Crusade, the time of greatest glory and most insidious treachery. We have deliberately left out probably the most important experiment of the Emperor, which will forever transform not only the Imperium itself, but also the entire galaxy. The experiment which will be the beginning of the Crusade and which will make the galaxy ablaze. The Primarch project was kept in strictest secrecy, for it was the Emperor's main stake in the coming war with the entire cosmos. This project began during the Unification Wars and included the creation of 20 superhumans, their nurturing and preparation for commanding the Imperium armies. The Emperor used his own genes with some animal genomes added. Thus, the found sample of a Primarch genome called Subject 6 included DNA similar to that of a wolf or a dog, possibly referring us to the Legion of Space Wolves. We were getting a little ahead of ourselves, though. The Emperor needed not only superhuman commanders, he needed demigods that would arouse awe, fear, and respect in his followers. Using all his witchcraft, The ruler of humanity chained the souls of his sons, endowing them with incredible courage and charisma. The 20 infants were kept in special capsules, which in turn were located in an underground laboratory under the Himalayas. The use of sorcery in their creation could make the emperor's sons extremely vulnerable to the influence of destructive forces, so special protective signs were placed on their capsules and on the entrances to the laboratory. However, the gods of chaos became aware of the secret of the emperor. They began to suspect that not only would the Lord of Mankind not fulfill his vows, but also that the creation of the Primarchs could tip the scales in the direction of the forces of order. They poured warp winds on Terra, which broke into the Emperor's laboratories even through mental protection. Nevertheless, the gods were still unable to kill the Primarchs in the capsules. So they scattered the capsules to different worlds of the galaxy, letting the Immaterium energy through each one. The babies were lucky because each of them fell on an inhabited world, and therefore could be found and raised by someone. The Emperor felt that his children were still alive, but could not tell exactly where they were. And then the priority task of their future crusade was to find the Primarchs in the dark of space. But for such an ambitious plan, a powerful army was needed. The Imperium, of course, already had a regular army of regular soldiers, but it was not enough. As we know, by this time the Emperor had wiped out almost all Thunder Warriors, and there were not many custodians. Some of them no longer left the palace at all. So the Emperor again needed the vanguard of his army, a powerful force that would rush furiously and quickly into battle and forge victory. It had to be a large army, the production of which is put on stream. So here the Emperor combined the rapid pace and simplicity of creating Thunder Warriors with the incredibly complex, almost perfect DNA of his Primarchs. That is how the Space Marines were created. One legion of Marines was created from the genetic material of each of the Primarchs, which at that time had not yet received their famous names, but already reflected some features of appearance and character of their Primarchs, which at that time grew up in worlds far away from Terra. The first Marines appeared near the end of the Unification War and helped exterminate the Thunder Warriors and build the Imperium. In the 41st millennium, Space Marine orders select worthy men from the inhabitants of their homeworlds, or, if the order is based on a space fleet, from any other planet in their path. But at the end of the Unification Wars, the choice of recruits was only from the inhabitants of Terra, so the legions did not grow immediately. They were squads of about 100 Space Marines each, but their number was stubbornly growing. To turn an ordinary mortal into a tireless warrior of the Imperium, the strongest, most agile, fierce, and intelligent people were selected. The younger they were, the better. They began to be trained physically and mentally, while at the same time introducing the necessary implants that would eventually completely change a person's physiology. Psychological training allowed to improve reaction, concentration, pain threshold, as well as to help better control one's body and organs. To speed up such training, recruits were put into a state of hypnosis using special equipment, a hypnomet. We will tell you more about implants and stages of development of Space Marines in other episodes. Joint training and therapy were also aimed at building brotherhood in the team, which resulted in powerful bonds of friendship among soldiers, which helped them to act more effectively as a team in battle. The Mechanicus of Mars developed improved armor and weapons based on the armament of Thunderbolt warriors. Thus the Power Armor Mackay 2 Crusade appeared. After its creation, the name of the Thunder Warriors armor model received the Mackay 1 prefix, and it could even be used, though very rarely, and mostly for various ceremonies. The Mackay 2 armor was the first hermetic spaceborne armor, with a built-in life support system which allowed combat operations both on planets with unbreathable atmosphere and in outer space. Compared to the previous model, the strength of the armor was much improved, and the power cables of the Mackay 1 were laid outside for better cooling. In the Mackay 2 they were hidden under the chest plate, and nevertheless they did not overheat thanks to the new cooling systems. Unfortunately, the leg armor still had the power cables brought outside, which was one of the biggest vulnerabilities for the paratroopers of those years. The helmet contained technology to transmit data from the lenses and microphones directly to the wearer's brain, running the data through a computer. This allowed the paratrooper to automatically target and see in the infrared and ultraviolet spectrum, and in total darkness and in unexpected bright light, obscuring the image, and in the presence of loud noises, to sharply reduce their level. On their backs, the Space Marines carried a knapsack, which just contained a life support system, an air recycling system, medical nutrient fluids, a set of automatic medical devices. Such equipment in the knapsack will be used permanently in the future, including the following patterns of armor: the key weapon of the Space Marines. The bolter also received a new version called the Phobos. This bolter model was hand-assembled by Mars Magos to ensure that it would perform perfectly in the hands of the Emperor's warriors. At the time of the 40th millennium, bolters of this model were very rare and were revered as relics from the glory days of the Imperium. Finally, the strike force of the Emperor's army was ready. Equipment and weapons were provided, and soon the Space Marines were given the opportunity to show their effectiveness and strength in real combat. This event will go down in history as the first pacification of the Moon, and some chroniclers will call it the first battle of the Great Crusade. During the Unification Wars on the Moon, which also remained by itself during the Long Night, cults of scientists formed, which were incredibly advanced in the technology of forging gems and the art of controlling them. However, first of all, these were religious cults that tried to understand human nature through the human genome and then bring all humanity to a single genetic denominator. Except that each cult had its own idea of the ideal human being. The Emperor knew about these advanced technologies on the Moon and was eager to get his hands on them, for it would increase research and production of Space Marines tenfold. So he needed to capture the Moon. But full-scale war or bombardment was not an option, for then the most important laboratories would suffer. To begin with, the Emperor tried to get his way through diplomacy. However, the Gena cults refused, and after threatening war, they sent the Emperor's envoys back to Terra as a screaming mess of transparent skin and barricaded themselves on the Moon in preparation for an attack. The Lord of Humanity was furious, and it was at this point that the star hour of the still small, but already ready to fight Space Marines came. The plan was a swift attack, breaking resistance and the rapid destruction of the top cults. The future 7, 13, and 16 legions were chosen for this task. The attack tactics were quite cunning. The 16th Legion was the first to leave Terra, but as soon as their ships overcame the planet's gravity, they completely powered down the ship and began drifting through the cold void of space toward the Moon like released arrows. Only Space Marines in sealed armor could withstand the leisurely journey through the vacuum and cold. Their armor was covered with frost, but not a single warrior sustained any damage at all. After them flew out the remaining 2 legions. Their ships flew at full speed, and the void shields were supplied with maximum energy. They attracted all the fire of the enemy's defense systems while the first wave of Marine ships unnoticed reached the lunar bases, where they began an unexpected assault. The operation was successful and showed the suitability of the troops to conquer the galaxy, and the Emperor, having received the necessary knowledge and technology, continued to expand his army. When the army of mankind was finally ready, the Emperor commanded the start of the Great Crusade, personally leading mankind to the edge of the solar system and thus triggering a chain of many important events that will not only leave a mark in the history of the Imperium, but will also affect the fate of the entire Milky Way galaxy. And it all begins with the Emperor's meeting with his first and most beloved son, Horus Lupercal. But we will talk about that in the next issue. And that's all. Do not miss the continuation of the story. Subscribe to the channel and press the bell, because this is the only way not to miss the next release. If you liked it, we will be happy to get your likes. If something does not like it, then write about it in the comments. Goodbye.